Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol roster building video, the series where we build lists to make all of your friends at your local game store hate you. And today we are continuing that trend with another list that's probably going to be very frustrating to play against, which is basically the idea of a defense skew, kind of like something you'd see in a few other games. For me, I've seen a lot of similar things in War Machine, where basically the idea is you're going to buff up one of your stats so stupidly high that it is incredibly aggravating for your opponent to do anything about it. So, the offensive version of this would be you have such high, number of attack dice or things buffing your attacks that your opponent's defensive tech doesn't matter anymore. We're doing the flip side here. We're going to be focusing all in on super pumping your defenses so that way your opponents just can't break through, or at least when they do, it's in very, very small amounts. So we're going to try this out. We're going to see if it works. I haven't had a chance to actually play with this list myself. But yeah, so the entire idea kind of out of the gate here is we're going to take a bunch of models that have the ability to add dice to another model's defense roll. And then once we run out of those models, because there aren't very many of them in the game, we'll start adding in models that just have naturally good defensive things or models that can kind of punish off of your opponents, failing to do damage and things like that. So, stuff like martial prowess and stuff like that, we're going to be playing around with. And then also just, characters that can count blanks and things like that. So to start things out, we're going to be making sure we include all of the characters who have the ability to add dice to another model's defense. The first one, I think the first one probably a lot of people thought of, is going to be Cable. He has the telekinetic shield here. He gets to add dice to someone else's defense, and that's just good. So yeah, we're going to be including him for sure. Next up is, of course, Doctor Strange. The original Doctor Strange also has this ability. We are going to choose to keep him at a 5 threat. We want to be able to go as wide as possible with this list because we want to be able to stack these effects. Because, I mean, we'll do the math on what the kind of most ridiculous thing you can kind of build with this at the end. But yeah, by putting him up to a 6 threat, I think we're just hampering that, so we're not going to do that. There are only two other models in the game that have the ability to add dice to another model's defense that I'm aware of. If I'm missing one, definitely yell at me in the comments below because I'm an idiot. So the first one here is Shadowcat, and Shadowcat has the can't touch this when this character or an allied character within range 2 is targeted by a physical or energy attack, or would make a dodge. So even this really adds to this because this is also going to be applying it to dodges. And it's got that little anti-push or throw thing, which is also going to be pretty cool. So definitely a worthy inclusion here. And last but not least, although probably least, honestly, is Darkstar. And yeah, Darkstar is one of the few models in the game that can do this. It does prevent advances, pushes, or places from the attack, which is going to be useful for a list like this, being able to not take your things out of position. So that is pretty cool, but it's also relatively expensive. And as you'll be very, very aware looking at this, none of these guys share any affiliations, really. I mean, Cable and Kitty share X-Men, but that's about it. So as far as affiliations, we're gonna have to be working to make this work, and I have decided we're gonna build this in Avengers, and there's a couple reasons for that. The first one being that Steve 1 actually plays to this reasonably well. I mean, he's got his own vibranium shield, so he's buffing his own defensive dice, and on his flip side, he's counting blanks, so he really... Oh, this is the wrong Steve. What am I doing? Um... Oh no, that was the right Steve. It's just the art, I'm pretty sure, is the same as the new Steve. Am I? Yeah, it is. Okay, that's throwing me off there. That's because I didn't flip his card. I went to the next one. That's what I did. Remember that part where I said I'm an idiot? Anyways, on his flip side, he has that I can do this all day, so he counts blanks. And he's got the Vibranium Shield giving himself extra dice. Now, you could make the argument that Steve 3 has the same style thing going on. However, I'm going to go with Steve 1 because I think the leadership works really, really well for a list like this. Making everyone's ability to add dice to somebody else's defense just a little bit cheaper is really, really good. And it is used by each allied character. So this means I can bodyguard onto Steve, have Cable, Strange, Kitty, and Darkstar all buff, and all of them get to benefit from that reduction. Meaning Darkstar's costs 2, and I think everyone else's cost 1. because of course that's how this that's that why can't we buff Darkstar, please? Um, but yeah, so he does share an affiliation with Cable, which is going to help a little bit, but it is going to make sure we're going to have to ensure that some of our other models that we're including here are also Avengers models. So we're going to want to take a look at some Avengers models that have things like counting blanks or, cool, rude things they can do when they succeed. Now, unfortunately, I'm pretty sure from looking into this before creating this video, none of the Avengers characters have a martial prowess effect where they get to go up to 5 dice and then deal damage if they don't take damage from the attack. So unfortunately, we won't be able to include any of those style characters from the Avengers roster, but we do have something that could be really, really obnoxious, and that is Shang-Chi. And the reason why I like Shang-Chi for this is because he does count blanks if the attack is targeting him from within 3. So as long as you can keep in that closer range area, he's going to be counting blanks, and if you can get them real up close, you have dragon chases its tail. If you don't take damage, you get to throw them away. You're counting blanks and you're adding dice to your defense rolls. So this starts to feel really, really good if you can kind of stack all of these things together. So I think Shang-Chi makes a lot of sense. He's an Avenger, so he's going to help us hit that Avengers affiliation more often. So right out the gate, we have Shang-Chi there. I wanted to put another Avenger or two in here just to make sure we had a few options as well, especially for some higher threat levels. So I came down to two other options, and they're actually both the same character. We're not planning on running these two together at any time anyways. So I came down to Black Widow and the Black Widow. And there's reasons for both. I mean, the first one is a two threat, and as we mentioned, we want to be able to go a little bit wider, and an affiliated two threat is a great step towards that. Also, having access to martial artist and Counter Strike are really, really valuable for something like this, because we're going to be counting blanks, and do you really want to put that much into trying to take down our two threat when we're able to buff the dice on this and then Counter Strike you afterwards? Probably not. So yeah, Black Widow definitely has a home here. And then if we want, if we're playing at a point where we want some higher threat characters, we have the Black Widow, who also counts blanks if they're within 2, and you're going to have the calculated risk here, for giving you access to full rerolls on physical or mystic. So no matter what side you're rolling dice for, if you're adding dice to it and you're getting full rerolls and you're potentially counting blanks, these can all be really, really good things and really annoying for your opponent to deal with it. And then when they finally do, you're dropping the objective token, not them. So yeah, I think the Black Widow has a big slot here. So that is bringing us to an almost completed roster. We are 8 out of 10, with, a decent spattering of Avengers characters here. We do have 2 slots open, and at this point, I really want to include some martial prowess characters. So I decided to go with Gamora as one of them, just because I really like Gamora. She's a lot of fun, but also you have stealth and you have martial prowess. So those are going to work well together, keeping your opponent close to you. Um, she gives you a little bit of offensive output as well. We do have a few hard hitters in this list, but having more doesn't hurt. She's got some nice mobility in there as well, so that's always nice. And honestly, I just kind of wanted to include Gamora, so we did. That is the world we're living in. So Gamora I chose as one of my martial prowesses here, and then the other one I wanted to go with is actually Elektra. And part of why I wanted Elektra is because that does give us access to grunts. The list didn't have any of those before, so that's always cool to have. And yeah, just in general, really, really solid stuff. She's also got that martial prowess, got the stealth. So again, the same logic in those abilities there. And yeah, just honestly, a piece that doesn't see the table nearly as often as they probably should, especially post buff, and comes with grunts and stuff. So that's also pretty cool. But yeah, there's not too much reasoning behind that. You could probably pick any martial prowess characters to fill these last 2 slots. I just picked these two kind of because I felt like picking these two. But yeah, so that is our roster of 10 characters. We're gonna go ahead and move on to tactics card selection now, and we'll see what our options are looking like there. Before we get into tactics cards, actually, another thing worth acknowledging is that Crimson Dynamo would probably be amazing in this list, but we're not going to include him because honestly, we could probably include Crimson Dynamo in most of the lists in this series, and he would be ridiculous in all of them. So we're not going to, but he would be fantastic here. If you were actually planning on like building something like this for a tournament, definitely a strong include. Handing out shocks and being able to reroll your opponent's attack dice are both incredibly powerful things. So yeah, he probably would take one of those martial prowess slots near the end, or maybe even some in for like the Black Widow or something like that. But yeah, that's not what we're doing here. So we're gonna go ahead and move into cards now. Alrighty, so first things first when it comes to cards, we are playing Avengers, so I think Avengers Assemble is a bit of a no-brainer there. Just a really, really good card. Next up, I think for our restricteds, there's a strong argument for a few options here, but personally, I don't like to leave home without brace, and we don't have enough things that work on dodges to really justify not having it. I think, while we generally have pretty good physical defense stats across the board, outside of kidding, most of our defensive tech doesn't work on dodges, so we are going to be wanting brace here. The next one, I think there's a really valid argument between either patch up or sacrifice, but I think we're going to be running a little power starved for patch up, so I'm going to lean towards sacrifice in this case. But I could see a really, really strong argument for patch up in this case, just because obviously being able to undo a bunch of the work they did into one of your models is going to be really, really frustrating to play against. So that's really, really good. But we're going to go with sacrifice for my version of this list at least, and yeah, we'll go from there. Looking at the other Avengers cards, I do want to take a look at Second Wind. I think Second Wind could potentially be really, really annoying in this list, where it's going to be really hard for them to deal any damage to our characters. So being able to remove even one can be really annoying. So I think we are going to bring Second Wind with us. And I think there's an argument for reserve members as well. I mean, you can add a die to defense with that, so that's pretty cool. Doctor Strange is a leader, Cable is a leader, so you're going to be able to benefit from either of them being in the roster as well. And we have a couple three threats that we want to be trying to include whenever possible. So yeah, I think reserve members has a worthy inclusion here as well. All right, going into character cards, I'm actually going to pick one that I honestly forgot existed, and that is Vapors of Valtor. So this is a Doctor Strange card that allows you to give a character obscuring misc tokens, and when they're targeted by an attack, you get to reveal a token at random, and if it is blank, you can re-roll any number of defense dice, or of the attacker's dice, rather. So yeah, this seems like it could be really, really fun, especially since we are running a bodyguard as our leader and we're running sacrifice, so we can kind of force attacks onto that character. Again, just ways of making this even more obnoxious. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and include Vapors of Valtor here as well, because I don't know, it's a cool card. You don't see it very often, and I think it kind of fits the theme, so we're gonna go with it. And yeah, that's the first one for character cards here. The other one I want to include is just because it's a good card. It's not even really because it's specifically something that I think is good for the list. It's just Chi Mastery. I think if you're bringing Shang-Chi, this card is worth bringing. It's just really good for him. It's guaranteed stagger on something and also just 2 more damage. You can also use it on defense, which can also be really, really obnoxious. So, or no, use it on your opponent's defense. That's okay. That's what I thought. But still, really, really good card. Doesn't fit the theme, unfortunately, but is what it is. All right, going into generics, I think the choices are relatively straightforward here. About a month ago, before the rotation, it probably would have been a little bit more interesting to pick them here. But because we're down to so few options, I think the choices are relatively straightforward, with fallback being really good, preventing double taps and things like that, because realistically we don't have the power to always be super buffing everyone's defense. So that's going to be relatively useful to have in our back pocket there. Also, recalibration matrix for, hey, they spiked and we didn't. Let's try that again. Um, and then lastly, I think we're going to actually go with a card that technically isn't released yet at time of recording, and I don't think it's going to be released by the time this video goes up. But we have seen the card, so we know it's going to exist in the near future, and that is Survival. Because I think this officially doesn't come out until the Apocalypse box releases, but this card is just going to be great for kind of being like, okay, well, that one you've been working at for a while now, and you've almost got him off the table. Maybe it's even Steve. What if you just couldn't touch him for a little bit? We're gonna set up some other things, get some powers so we can continue super buffing his defense for later. So yeah, I think survival fits the theme really, really well, because I mean, it's kind of what a def skew list is all about. But yeah, that is going to be our 10 tactics cards there. So lastly, we're going to go ahead and take a look at what our crises are going to be. So for crises on a list like this, there's a couple things we're going to be wanting to specifically avoid it, and that is things that are going to be dealing damage to us. Those don't sound like a great time. We don't want to be taking unnecessary damage, but we also do want to be keeping our models relatively close together because they all rely on being within, I believe, almost all of them are range 3 for their defensive buffing, so we want to be relatively close together for stuff like that. But we're gonna have to be careful. We don't want to bring, say, something like cubes because as much as we appreciate the extra power from cubes, we don't appreciate the damage so much. So we're gonna be avoiding that. But yeah, we're gonna start it with secures because I find secures a little bit easier for something like this. And the first one we're gonna pick is Deadly Meteors. It does have a chance to deal damage to us, which isn't great, but it's a relatively kind of, straight line map. We're gonna be keeping our guys relatively clumped up. So we're going to be able to take advantage of a lot of that stuff that we like from that. And it's a little bit of a higher threat, which we do appreciate as well. That said, I am also going to include Gamma with this one. Again, it's one of those ones where if they're throwing us out of position and stuff, they could technically deal some damage to us because of the Gamma shelters, but it's going to be a clumped up map, and we're definitely looking for that sort of thing with this list. So yeah, we're gonna take Gamma for this one because that does seem like it would be a relatively solid thing. Even though our 15 isn't the best, we'll just kind of hope we don't end up actually playing at 15 all that much. And then going into our final one, I'm tempted by something like Scoundrels because it's going to give us cover, which really stacks really nicely. There's an argument for Infinity Formula because we definitely appreciate the extra power. And then something like Intrusions is also pretty solid. I think in this case, between these three options, I am actually going to lead towards Scoundrels for this one. I do like Scoundrels quite a lot, and at 20 threat, there's probably some interesting lists we can do with that. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and jump into Scoundrels here, but that's going to be our secures list. I think there's a strong argument to swap out a couple of them for stuff like intrusions or infinity formula. Actually, you know what? The more I think about it, I really do like intrusions here. I think I'm going to drop gamma for it because I like our 19 a lot better than our 15. And yeah, I think that's what we're going to go with there is those three. Next, we go into extracts here. And yeah, once again, we want to avoid anything that's going to deal damage to us. And the first one I'm seeing is, like I said, I really like our 19 with this list. I'm going to go with Deadly Legacy Virus here. I do like that quite a lot. We don't have much in the way of kind of safe grabs or anything like that, so we're going to have to be somewhat mindful of that. We do have Cable, who is a safe grab under Steve 1, I believe, so that is nice. But we don't have more than that, so we're gonna have to be somewhat careful with what we're doing. Although Cable's gonna be basically an every game piece for this list anyways, so that's fine. Next, we wanna be looking at what our other options might be here. I don't hate Montesi, even though it's Mystic, which is a bit of a weak side for a lot of our characters, notably our leader. We're able to add a bunch of dice, and they can't really modify or add dice to the Montesi beams, so I don't hate that. That one's probably pretty solid for us. In a similar vein, Researcher is probably quite good for us for the same reason something like Gamma or Deadly Meteors is good for us, is just kind of keeping everyone clumped near the middle. So I do really like Researcher, and I'm probably going to include that one as well. Again, we don't love the threat value, but we'll just kind of hope that that doesn't get selected when it comes up. And then, I'm tempted by Extremists because, again, 19 I think is this list's favorite threat, but I don't think it likes Extremists particularly much. I feel like we don't have the ability, because we're running 5 threats, we don't have the ability to go as wide as we would want to go with mutant extremists. So I think we're going to be passing on that one, unfortunately. And our final slot's really, really tough here because a lot of these are just kind of dealing damage to things. So I think our final slot just is Montesi, and that's kind of the world we're living in there. So that is our final roster. We're going to go ahead and review the entire thing now. Before we overview the roster, I did also want to take a quick look at the breakdowns just to see how versatile we can actually be with this one. So we do have very few options at 15, which I kind of knew was going to be a thing if we're trying to include both Cable and Steve. Because obviously, without Cable, we're kind of immediately defeating the purpose of a lot of the things we're trying to do. We could technically run one of the other ones instead, but I think Cable, just being an Avenger, is going to be the easiest one to squeeze at most threat values. So I basically set this up so it's only showing me versions of the roster that include both Steve and Cable. So at 15, we don't really play into the def skew all that much. It's really just Cable playing that game. but it does get better at the higher threats. At 16, there's actually exclusively versions that have one of the def skew characters in there plus Cable, so that's really really nice to see. When we go up to 17, we have something like this crazy list here, which is going to be giving us three of those models that are buffing our defensive stats, and then just Widow and Steve. But we don't really have any other options for that. So obviously, based on the scenario, it might be better to pick one of these other ones. But if we're really going for that theme, that is our 17 right there, and it's kind of locked. At 18, we start to widen up. We get a few extra options here. And again, most or no, all of our options, it looks like, do include one of the other def boosting models. So that's always good to see. I think two, at least two of them is kind of the sweet spot, but ideally more. And then at 19, I'm standing by what I said before. I really like our options at 19. I think even though it's technically not as versatile as what we have at 20 with 13 options, I like the options better at 19. Just seeing the three def skew models in most of the different versions of this here, probably the first one being my favorite, just because Darkstar is a model that exists. But I do like these versions as well, where we can sub in one of the four threat Avengers as well. So those are both very valuable options to me as well. And then lastly, we go to our 20 threat versions where unfortunately we can't actually get three def skew models wide. We can only ever run two of them, but we can run any two of them, as assuming one of them is Cable. So we do have some flexibility there as well, and that is always nice to see. So we do have some really solid options, and we have something that works at every threat level. So it does work, but you definitely want to try and avoid 15 with a list like this. You want to be able to go a little bit wider with it. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this though. I was a little worried the breakdowns were going to be kind of overly tight, and I think at some threats they are, but for the most part it should be fine. Anyways, going into our final roster here, we have our 10 characters with Captain America Steve Rogers, the first one. We've got Cable and Doctor Strange being our 5 threat defensive skewers here. We've got Shadowcat and Darkstar coming as 3 threat defensive skewers. Also, really notably that there aren't any 4 threat or 6 threat or whatever other threat value defensive skewers that I was able to find. So that's worth acknowledging, I think. Then we have our models that are here because they are Avengers. That is Shang-Chi, Black Widow, and the Black Widow. And then we have the models that we would ideally like to be buffing the defensive stats for, that being Gamora and Elektra. So yeah, we've got a pretty solid like pile of different things here. Obviously, we want to be trying to run as many of these four as possible in any given game, and then from there we worry about making sure we're affiliated with these three and having some kind of cool crackback stuff with these guys. I was noticing in the breakdown these two didn't get used in a lot of the ones that had good amounts of def skews, which kind of makes sense because they were not Avengers and they're not def skews. So if we're running a lot of these guys, then we probably are also just running these guys. So it makes sense these two don't get included all that often, but I still think they're worth having in the list. And honestly, I couldn't really think of anyone who would have been better for those roles to still fit the theme of the list. So it is what it is. Going into tactics cards, we have Avengers Assemble as our Avengers card, and we also chose to include reserve members and Second Wind. For our restricted cards, we have Brace for Impact and Sacrifice. Going to character cards, we have Vapors of Valtor and Chi Mastery. And then we got some restricteds in Fallback, Recal, and Survival. Going into our crises, we have Deadly Meteors Mutate Civilians, Superpowered Scoundrels, and Intrusions for our secures. And then for extracts, we have Deadly Legacy Virus Cured, Research Station Attacked, and Montesi Formula. So yeah, I'm actually really happy with how this list has turned out. I'm curious to try this for myself, see, if something like this is actually a viable option of just kind of super bumping defense stats and just saying, hey, can you break through this? Because this seems like it would be really obnoxious to go into. So as always, I am going to include the disclaimer that we do with a lot of the videos in this series of if you're trying to make friends, maybe don't bring this list out. It will probably tilt a lot of people. I could see this being very rage-inducing to play against just all right, I'm going to throw, what, let's say 10 dice against this attack, because, I mean, actually we can do this. We can include 3 of these guys at best. There was no world where we can include all 4 because if we include all 4 plus Steve, that is 20 threat, and that's not affiliated, so is what it is. But if we include 3 of them all of them add 2 dice, and we're bumping up Steve, who's adding 2 dice to himself. We are adding 8 dice to the defense roll. So Steve can roll 12 dice counting blanks on physical or energy attacks. That's the full stop there, because some of these only work on physical or energy, so we have to be mindful of that as well. That's kind of insane. Characters like Shang-Chi or Black Widow, we can still add, I want to say, at least 6 dice to them. So we can still have them rolling 10 dice, which is kind of absurd for defense. I mean, that's a lot of dice. So yeah, that's really cool to see. I'm glad this kind of works out the way it does. Really, really neat to see how that works out. I think there is kind of an argument for trying to throw a gem on Strange and seeing what that does to our breakdowns. Just because we kind of already have a 5 threat version of that in Cable, so I'm actually, you know what, I'm gonna try that and check what that looks like. Okay, so this is actually really interesting how many more options it gave us in our breakdowns here at a lot of different threat levels. Immediately out the gate, I'm seeing we have a 15 I actually really like now in these 3 models, really taking advantage of that being a 6 threat and totaling these 3 up to 15. We have a really obnoxious to crack 15 here actually, and I like that quite a lot. That's really, really cool. Looking at 16, I don't think it changes too much here. We get this version of the list, which is kind of interesting. I don't have it set to force cable this time, so that is partially why we're seeing more options here as well. But we do get this version of the list, which could be kind of interesting. We also actually do have an Avengers version that doesn't include cable and has these two. So I missed that one before, but that's nice to see at 16 as well. If we go into 17, I do like that. I do really like that. That's the one we were looking at before there. I don't know if there's many other options that we're big fans of here. Yeah, we have defenders options technically. Um, but yeah, no, I that does give us a second option that I really like at 17, so that's kind of cool. Looking at 18, it looks like most of the options we had before are still there. We do have a couple that have Strange in them now, but for the most part, Strange is kind of excluded from the 18 threat there. 19, it gives us a couple of options. Oh, I actually just thought about this. At 20, it could make something like this really interesting. The problem is I don't think that would be affiliated. I'm curious to see what this does for 20 though. Does give us a couple decent options though at 19 as well that we didn't have before. So I do like that. And then at 20, I really like that. Something like one of these is really cool actually. Okay, that's kind of awesome. Um, yeah, you know what? I think we're keeping a stone on Strange. I was really, really strongly against that when we first selected Strange, but I think Soulstone Strange is potentially the way to go for this, just because that 6th threat, it's going to give him extra power to be able to do his thing more often. Yeah, I take back what I said before. 6th threat Strange is the way to go for this list. So, one final little change there just at the end, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this list turned out. This is seeming really exciting, and I'm definitely gonna try this out for myself some point in the near future because this seems really fun. I'm looking forward to putting this on the table. But let me know what you guys think. What would you guys have done differently? Characters you might have included that I didn't? Am I a big idiot missing, a super obvious model for a list like this? Definitely let me know down below if there is anything like that because always curious to see what you guys think on these sorts of things. But yeah, that is going to do it for me for this one. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please do drop a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. We do kind of discussion focused content like this on the weekdays, and we have battle reports on the weekends. So if you're a fan of any of that sort of thing, feel free to jump on in. But that's going to do it for this one. So until next time, have a great day, everybody. Peace.